Today we're talking about church. Church feels a lot of days like a really antiquated institution. A lot of our kids aren't going back to church. It's seen as something that's for parents and grandparents and great grandparents. And it's hard to know or sometimes get a grasp on what is the future of church. For so many of us, it's been part of our lives for our whole life, and it's been part of our culture, but that's less and less true. I've always had kind of a lover's quarrel with church. I grew up in a church and went through those classics, times of being in junior high and high school and feeling frustrated with what I perceived as a lot of hypocrisy, beginning to change and realize that Jesus was not white and Republican like the church I grew up in, that instead he was this radical figure that challenged all of us no matter where we're at in life, and was actually a person of color, a prophet living on the margins, not in comfy and cozy pews. In my early adulthood, I became even more frustrated with the institutionalism of the church. In fact, I spent a few years in a house church that threw off all of the trappings of a traditional church and just met to talk in living rooms, trying to get back to something that people that are outside of the church might recognize and respond to. But in the end, I missed the liturgy, I missed the music, I missed the gathering, I missed the institution that can hold you throughout a lifetime, even though sometimes that institution can be really, really frustrating. When I was a young mom, I was looking for a church that I wanted to bring my children to, that I felt like they were going to get a way of faith that would hold them throughout their life, that would allow and not be threatened by their questions. And who am I kidding? A place that wasn't threatened by my questions either. A place that had immense beauty to offer, because my soul, and I think all of our souls, need that beauty of music and beautiful words and silence. I needed a place that had a grown-up faith that I could continue to grow up into. And I think that's a lot of why I became a pastor, because I thought that was still possible. That despite how frustrating the church can be, and despite how institutional and slow it can be, that it is something that's worth investing in and fighting for and continuing to work on. Church is, to me, a few things, but most of all, it's a conversation that we enter into others and with others about what it means to live life in the way of Jesus. And I want to be in that conversation with all of you. I want to be in that conversation with the church worldwide, where we can connect and truly come together as siblings. This week in your readings, you're going to read an article by that's a little excerpt out of the book Faith After Doubt by Brian McLaren, that you're invited to read the whole thing. It's really a fantastic book. But Brian talks about a conversation that he had with a woman named Karis, a woman that I really relate to, and who was very much like I was when I was in my 30s. But she says something really powerful. She says, I don't just want to be a good, happy, fulfilled, spiritual consumer while the world goes down in the toilet. I don't just want to be a good, happy, fulfilled, spiritual consumer while the world goes down the toilet. Now, I think that church can do some of both. Church is a place to get filled up and fulfilled, but it is also a place to go out into the world and to seek the healing and the justice of God. St. Augustine said something that I find profoundly true still all these thousands of years later. He says, the church is precisely the state of communion of the whole world. The church is precisely the state of communion of the whole world. It's a really ancient idea. How does the church reflect who Jesus is, what Jesus intended? How does it become a model for the kind of community that we want to build in the world, for the ways that we think the world can be healed? That's a really tall order for the church. And it's something that we're always moving towards, even if we're not fully achieving it. And that's what I'm committed to as a pastor. And I get it wrong so often. And I find myself going back and forth between being super frustrated with institutionalism and then at the same time being the person who wants to keep the institution alive. I mean, that's part of my job, isn't it? But I think at Valley Presbyterian Church, we have this capacity to live in that tension and to continue to move towards that vision that Augustine said. We have a powerful mission to be a base camp building a more loving world. Brian McLaren calls all this faith expressing itself in love, which is also what the Apostle Paul said is all that matters. Church can be a space for the soul. It can be a space for justice. It can be a space to go in, and it is a space from which to go out. I like to think of it as a collective of all of us bringing what we have, growing and learning from each other. We gather and we find strength and creativity and courage, and we grow and we go out to build a more loving world. May it be so.